Well, today we have a theme in the readings that's dear to the hearts of all Roman Catholics: giving. But it actually is a big part of who we are as Christians, trying to be more holy people. St. Francis, in his prayer that we have been praying for several months now, has this phrase, "For it is in giving that we receive." And we probably all had that experience, that as we give something away, we often receive more than we've given. I remember when I was pretty young, and I think it was probably at Christmas time, all of a sudden I got this realization that there was something very good about giving a gift to my parents that I had thought about, planned for, thought that they would like. Up to that point, I had just been conscious of Christmas being a time of getting. So there was a shift for me. Now, I have to say, it wasn't quite the same between me and my brothers, but it was something with my parents. So this Sunday, the readings show us people who were radical givers. And they're offered as an example for us to learn and to maybe learn a little better how to give well and how to give responsibly. And our model, of course, for giving is Jesus himself, who gave everything he had all his life, and at the end gave his life out of love for all of us. Well, let's look at the first reading. There is a little background that might be helpful. At the time of Elijah, the king of Israel was King Ahab, and he was regarded as the worst king Israel had ever had, the most evil, the one who was least likely to help the widows, the orphans. And so at one point, Elijah prophesied that all the streams would dry up in the land, rain wouldn't come, and even the dew wouldn't be there in the morning. And sure enough, it happened. And at some point in this, the little stream that ran by Elijah's dwelling also dried up. And at that point, God tells him to go to Zarephath and meet this widow, someone who you think might not be the logical one to be able to help Elijah, since she was at death's door herself, as we heard. Nevertheless, Elijah trusts God and goes, and she trusts the man of God enough to do what he asks, and gives him the last of her meager food. And she's rewarded, as we heard. When I read this, it reminded me of the Blessed Mother, who also was requested by God to do a very difficult thing. And her response also was one of trust. May it be done unto me according to your will. And then her whole life is a life of giving. not living a life that she might have wanted, living the life that God wanted her to live, accompanying her son at the very end with pain and anguish we can't even imagine. And then the gospel. The gospel also a story about giving, but there is a little twist to it. There are two parts. The first part, as you heard, Jesus is denouncing the scribes. Well, who were the scribes? They were the VIPs of Jewish hierarchy. They were the learned ones, the lawyers. They were also theologians. They knew the Jewish law better than anybody. And for that, they got to wear these long robes in public. People would greet them with respect. They got the best seats in the synagogue right in front of the scroll. They also got the best seats at the banquets. And many of them kind of reveled in all that attention. Some of them were even more unscrupulous, though, and extorted money from people who really didn't have it, like this poor widow that we heard about in the gospel. And while Jesus honors her for her sacrifice, I don't think the message we should take away is that we should be willing to give every last penny that we have. God does not want us to throw ourselves into poverty. Jesus is, while he is approving of this widow, he condemns the economic system in the temple. Why wasn't some of the money that the rich people were throwing into the treasury, or why wasn't that used to help the poor, the ones who had nothing? And this, I think, was a very important area for Jesus, because as you remember, later in his life, when he goes up to Jerusalem for the last time and cleanses the temple, it was the same thing going on. As far as he was concerned, the economic system around the temple had become corrupted. Well, how do we apply these readings to our lives? What are we to make of it? Well, I think one thing we need to be clear about is that we do have an obligation to be people of generosity. It was a very strong part of the Jewish law to support the widows and the orphans, the ones who were helpless in the society. And they are our spiritual ancestors. It's also a strong part of Catholic social teaching. So it's something we need to take seriously. Now, I've done this, and I'm sure many of you have done it from time to time, in terms of the distinction between excess and surplus. The difficult place to draw the line. But one place we know is not surplus is when, as we've all done, when we go to Mass or go somewhere, we're asked for a donation, we haven't prepared for anything, and we're reaching around to find spare change, a couple of dollars to look respectable. That's not coming from our, that is coming from our excess, I would say. And I think Jesus might say, well, maybe you can do a little bit better than that. So I think we are supposed to give us some kind of intention. After all, what we're giving is going to help other people. Maybe we could even give with a sense of gratitude that we have the means, that we can help others. Almsgiving, after all, is something that forms us spiritually. It does help us to become better people, more generous people. And I think we've all had the experience, perhaps in our own lives, perhaps in observing other people, that having too many possessions can really get in our way spiritually. We have the example of the rich young man in the scripture who was too attached to his riches to let go of them and follow Jesus. And so we're told he went away sad. Well, we don't have to be sad. We don't have to be confused and burdened by this whole notion of giving. If you think for a moment, the theologians tell us that God is love. The essence of God is love. And what does love do? Love gives. Love extends itself. It can't help but do that. We're told that's the reason why God made creation in the first place, because he couldn't stop himself in a sense. He had to create, had to give love, and continues moment to moment giving his love to all of us. And I think maybe if you reflect for a moment on good people that you've known or that you know in your life, one of the characteristics I think that they have is generosity. And it just seems to come naturally to them, doesn't it? It almost seems like they're generous to a fault. But I think as we become more and more holy, as we keep striving to be more holy and to be better people, I think we will find that generosity is going to be more and more natural to us as well. And at some point, the distinction between our surplus and then what is more fundamental than the surplus, that distinction kind of goes away. And we're just people who give because it's part of our nature. Jesus came, after all, to give us freedom, to give us abundant life, not just life, but abundant life. And I think as we pursue holiness, become people who are givers, I think we will understand more and more what it means to experience abundant life.